Hello, my name is Eric Bubble. I sometimes go by the name of Simon, and this is a thoughts video. A thoughts video on Star Wars Legion. This is a game by Fantasy Flight Games. It came out in 2018, and it is a tabletop miniatures game. So this is very much in line with Warhammer, Infinity, Malefics, all of those standard tabletop games. This is what it's kind of aiming to be at. So I'm going to just talk a bit about it, if it's worth your money, and what are my general thoughts on if I think it's a good game or not, because that's really the important thing. So the one thing I have to say is, this kind of surprised me. I did not think Fantasy Flight were going to do this kind of game. You see, they already have Star Wars X-Wing and they already have Star Wars Armada. Then they try to do tabletop miniatures with Rune Wars, and it hasn't gone so well for them. So it was interesting to see them bring out this. Now, the gameplay is very similar to a lot of their other stuff. So if you know X-Wing, if you know Armada, if you know Rune Wars, then you have a fairly good idea of how it works. It is, again, miniatures on a map, and you're most likely going to be rolling custom dice to then do damage and try and fulfill objectives. Now, in Star Wars Legion, the core set, you get two factions. You get the Rebels and you get the Empire. You get Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker, and you get a whole bunch of Rebel troopers and a whole bunch of Stormtroopers to battle it out. You get a few objective cards and also a few kind of battle deployment cards. And that's pretty much their standard affair. It's the kind of thing where if you want to get the full game, if you want to get the full experience, you do need to buy at least two core sets. I think it's going to be a maximum about 800 points then, when one core set will only give you about 400. The core set does come with a couple of nice upgrade cards and a couple of nice customization cards for your armies. So for example, you can do things like add a machine gunner to the Rebel army, or you could do, for example, add a bazooka to the Stormtroopers, or even say, for example, add a mounted artillery to your one walker if you're playing with the Rebels. So that's all really cool. The core gameplay is actually quite decent. You have three phases. One is going to be the tactical phase. Then you have the activation phase, and then finally you're going to have the refresh phase. The tactical phase is actually one of the best parts about the game. You see, essentially you're going to have a hand of cards, which you can always customize. And these cards are basically things you're going to be playing. You're going to, each turn on your tactical phase, you're going to play one of these cards, and it'll then go out of the game for the rest of the whole 8 rounds, which means you only get one shot at using it. Now, this card's going to do two things, or technically three. Firstly, it's going to tell you your initiative, which means you're either going to go first or you're going to go second in the round. The second thing it does, it tells you which units you can activate, which I think is the best way of saying it. Essentially, what's going to happen is each of your units gets assigned basically a disc that says this is the infantry disc, this is the commander disc, this is your vehicle disc. These will all get shuffled randomly and put onto a stack. What the tactics card does is allow you to single-handedly choose which kind of unit you want to activate. For example, if you play a Skywalker card, you can then choose to activate Luke. If, for example, you maybe choose to play like a generic push tactics card, then you can choose 2 units. What this means then is when you go into activation phase, you can either choose to activate a unit that you know will then activate, or you can take a unit from the top of the stack. So there's a nice element of you never really sure which unit is going to go in what order, because there's a bit of randomization there. Now, that being said, in the starter set you don't really get that kind of feeling, simply because you have tactics cards that allow you to activate 2 units, and you only have 4 units to work on either side, which is not that great, which means it kind of removes that cool element, but you can see the potential in how it lies. Do you want a tactics deck that has a lot of really strong cards in it, but might require you to play a bit slower, or you'll have a slower initiative and you'll have less choice in which units activate? Or do you want to play a more general tactics deck where you have a lot of control of what units activate, but they're not going to be performing anything or special feats? And that's really a cool phase. I must say the tactics phase is one of the best bits about it. Then you get to activations. Activations when you're going to activate a unit. When you activate a unit, it plays similarly to other games like they have. So if you played Star Wars Imperial Assault, it's similar to that. Essentially, your character or your unit will have 2 actions, and that actions can be to move, in which case you simply are going to use movement templates, which is very nice to use, I must say, and they work very nicely on the bases that come with the game. You can also do an attack action, which is going to be your stock standard Fantasy Flight affair, where you're going to be rolling some dice. If you hit, your opponent will then roll some defense dice to cancel those hits, and then damage gets assigned by the defender to kill off some people. There are a few more rules when it comes to line of sight. You basically have to try and see a target and then work out how many of your miniatures see the target, and then you work out what weapons they can use. There's also a thing of heavy cover and light cover, where light cover provides 1 defense and that can block 1 damage, and heavy defense or heavy cover provides 2 defense. And again, that's quite nice. The combat is actually quite nice and snappy and plays relatively fast. You do have this odd situation where you'll sometimes roll surges, and certain units convert surges differently. For example, the rebel troopers can convert surges on defense, while the stormtroopers can convert surges on attack, so they are more accurate as stormtroopers. Again, it plays off the joke that stormtroopers are actually inaccurate in the movies. Then you also have the aim, where you simply will get an aim token onto that unit, and that'll allow you to perform better in combat. You have basically a defend, or a bunker, or take cover, and that will then provide you more defense if you're being attacked. And then you have 2 other ones which are quite cool. You have standby, which is essentially like a version of Overwatch. You essentially are putting your unit on standby, and you can then choose to interrupt your opponent's move if you choose to do so using an attack or move action. And this is quite cool. So essentially it means you're waiting for your opponent to do something, but it also means you have a bit less control during your turn. However, I still think it's a really wonderful thing to do. It's a wonderful thing of like stormtroopers come bursting out around the corner, you're already in standby, and you just take a few shots at them using your turn. That's really, really fun. And then you have Rally. Rally is where you kind of refresh your troopers. So any upgrade you have, a lot of upgrades, whenever you use like an upgrade, so for example, if you attach concussion grenades to your troopers, and then you use them during combat, they'll get exhausted. When you rally, you can then bring those cards back to use, and then you can use them a second time. Really great. But they also remove suppression. Now, suppression is kind of this game's version of being panicked, or morale test, essentially, in other games, where you get suppression whenever you get fired upon. So if the rebel troopers fire upon the stormtroopers, then the stormtroopers get 1 token of suppression. If they get fired upon again, they'll get another token. And certain characters or certain units will have a suppression ranking. If you meet that suppression ranking by basically the number of tokens on them, then they perform 1 less action. And if you double that rating, so for example, if you have a suppression rating of 1 and you double it, it goes to 2. Then that unit has to then run away during their next activation, which is crippling to the defender, or crippling to your commander. And then of course there's a thing where if you move your commander close to them, they can then perform checks. It's a bit more complicated. But that being said, the core rule set actually works really nicely. I like the idea of suppression, the idea of putting a unit, like a really dangerous person, under suppression, simply so you can lessen their activations. And then of course you have the refresh phase after all those activations, where you'll simply remove 1 suppression token from each of your characters and get ready for the next round. That's the core gameplay in a nutshell. If you are familiar with any tabletop game, it plays very similarly to those. Again, it's a whole tactics idea of moving troops around. I will say now, you do kind of get a good mix of things in the starter set. I do have to say that you get Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader, both of who are really cool. Darth Vader has this cool saber throw ability where you can just like tore up a unit. The Empire also has speeder bikes, which again, there's a really nice contrast between like the speeder bikes are quite rushy and can get through the landscape quite fast, where the rebel troopers actually have a small or miniaturized AT-ST. It's like basically a walker or personal walker, and that tends to want to get in nice and close and use its kind of grappling claws to do damage. But it's a nice difference that normally the rebel troopers are all like nimble and supposed to be hiding, where in this case it's actually the stormtroopers or the Empire who have the nimble abilities going for them. So there's a really nice contrast in how things play out. There's other things such as, for example, when vehicles take damage, if they take too much damage, their weapon might be disabled, they might lose action points, or they might lose movement. That's great, I love that. But again, the core rule set is actually quite easy to understand. There's a few issues when it comes to dealing with things like line of sight, and if a unit is a heavy cover or light cover, but these can mostly be sorted out. I do even like the fact that there's a rule that if 2 people have a disagreement and they can't reach to some conclusion, they essentially have to roll the dice and see which one's better. and I think that's great. That being said, though, what you get is really good. You get a good amount of stuff to play with. You get a good handful of missions, good handful of deployments. It's all very good. The trouble being, though, is I don't really think there's a market for this game. You see, the reason why Warhammer is so good, again, not good as in terms of mechanics, but the reason why it's been so popular is because of its kind of lore behind it. It's kind of, this space opera of mechanized death and space marines and the empire and the chaos and infidels and heretics, and it all kind of becomes a bit weird. But people really latch onto that. Tabletop gamers really latch onto that kind of lore. Whereas if you are a Star Wars fan, you most likely already have something like X-Wing or Armada, and you most likely don't have the money to really afford Star Wars Legion as well. The game has come out with a couple of expansions. You have air speeders, and you have an AT-ST to work with. You also have General Leia, you have Han Solo, you have Boba Fett, and General Grievous. Not General Grievous. General Vice, I think it is. Again, to add to your armies, you also have various troopers to add as well. So, for example, if you want to add Starship Troopers to your Rebel army, you can do so as well. So there's a nice medley of expansions. So you can kind of see Fantasy Flight does want to push the game. But I don't really think there is a market for it. Like I said, the people that play Star Wars board games most likely already have or heavily invested into X-Wing. And it also doesn't help that X-Wing 2nd edition is going to be coming out at Gen Con, so do you really want to spend money on Star Wars Legion when you know there's going to be another X-Wing right around the corner? Likewise, for me, I haven't picked it up because I have Star Wars Imperial Assault, and it's a lot of similar mechanics. I'm actually surprised by how much they borrowed, simply in terms of awesome model detail. Model details are very good, but they did borrow quite a lot of the model figures from Star Wars Imperial Assault. And even just the simple idea of doing 2 activations, of moving, attacking, or doing something else, that comes from Star Wars Imperial Assault, which came from Descent. And I'm not to say that they are being cheeky by basically reusing the same mechanics over and over again, but it means, why would I bother picking up Star Wars Legion? If it's at a good price point, maybe, but even then, it's not going to see a lot of play. I'm going to play it maybe once or twice with my friend, and then probably going to abandon it because I don't want to invest heavily into all the expansions. I think Star Wars Legion is a good game. It's a good core system for a tabletop miniatures games. There's so many potential for rules there. They already have added a crap ton, if you excuse my language, where you already have rules in the game for climbing up buildings and or climbing up different pieces of terrain. There's already rules for that, and that you can kind of see that they do want to take this game further. But there is a lot of tabletop miniatures game out there, and what you tend to find is the people that play miniatures games, or these kind of, these strategic tactical miniatures games on the table, they most likely have already invested heavily into certain sets. Again, it also doesn't help that we just had, Age of Sigma, the new edition of Age of Sigma has come out. So you're looking at a game that's competing with other games that are very well established, and it's not doing enough. It can't rely solely on the Star Wars brand. Yeah, they have done a lot with it, but I've shown it to a couple of people who like Star Wars, and they're like, yeah, this is cool, but I kind of want the Clone Wars, which is weird. It's a really weird thing to say because those Clone Wars movies weren't the most popular. But for some reason, that kind of war resonates a lot more strongly with people than the whole Empire versus Rebellion. Maybe it's because the Empire versus Rebellion war was more of a skirmish, really. It's more guerrilla fighting. It was never really a full-blown tactical fights in forests besides the Forest of Endor. And even that was only like 2 regiments of troops at most. Look, end of the day, it is always your choice as to what you want to buy. But for me personally, Star Wars Legion is a very good game. It's got some great mechanics, but at the same time, because it borrows those mechanics so heavily from other games, and because you most likely have those other games already, there really is no point in picking up Star Wars Legion. I'm sorry to say. But hey, you know what? You probably have a different opinion. I would love to hear from it. So, if you did like this video, remember to hit the like and subscribe button. If you didn't like this video, you can always hit the dislike button, but also let me know in the comments as to why. I love to improve my videos and I want to get better at it. As well, please leave a message if you are interested in picking up Star Wars Legion. I would love to hear your thoughts on maybe if you do prefer the Clone Wars to the Empire versus the Rebellion. That being said, a lot of people are happy that it wasn't the First Order versus the Resistance. Anyway, that's going to be it for me. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.